Welcome, pool guys and gals, to the Let's Talk About Pools podcast, where your host, Lauren Broom, will take a splash into many topics in the pool industry to educate all aquatic professionals. Listen in, and you just might be surprised what you'll learn. So let's jump right in.
Welcome, everybody, today to the Let's Talk About Pools podcast. And on episode 26, we're going to have a special roundtable episode on waterproofing of elevated or suspended pools, and also talk about just the maintenance of community managed pools, especially down here in Florida. This episode was kind of spurred by what happened in June with the condo collapse and the discussion of elevated and then suspended pools. My guests on the episode today are Betsy Barbieux of Florida CAM Schools. So she's a specialist with Community Association Management. I have Vito Mariano, who's like the leading person in the pool industry when it comes to waterproofing of concrete and anything about concrete, and was also on the PHTA standard board for the new suspended pool, elevated pool standard that they were working on before the collapse actually happened. And then we have Kramer, who's the president of Vigilant services here in Florida. He's an engineer. He's in community management. So we have a well-rounded roundtable discussion today with different perspectives that will bring you in to community managed pools, just to how to think about how their maintenance is done for their swimming pool, how they save their money, and just the thought processes that go through a community association managers, the condo boards, the HOA boards. So we're talking mostly about like condo owner associations, homeowner associations. So really excited to bring this special episode to you guys today. I know it's a little bit longer than normal, but please stay on and listen. And also, I want to say thank you to my two awesome podcast sponsors today, Basecrete, which Vito Mariano owns. Thank you so much for being a podcast sponsor. And also poolmarketing.com. Thank you, Marianne and Joe Trusty, for being a continued podcast sponsor. So let's jump right into this episode, and I hope you enjoy it. After words from Basecrete as our sponsor, I want to say thank you so much, Vito Mariano and Basecrete, which is a flexible waterproof bond coat for concrete. He works all over the world. If you have any questions about concrete or waterproofing of concrete, this is the company you need to call. And I want to say thank you again for being a sponsor of the Let's Talk About Pools podcast today and allowing people to listen to the podcast to continue their education and thought processes in our industry. Thank you so much. And let's jump right into our episode now, guys.
Welcome, everybody, today to the special roundtable episode of Let's Talk About Pools. And I've got three wonderful individuals here today, and we'll do introductions in just a minute. But our special roundtable episode will be regarding condo buildings or homeowners associations and what happened in Surfside condo in Miami, but we're going to talk in general about any of these condo buildings in Florida. And when it comes to specifically the pool, there's been a lot of conversation about the swimming pool and not being properly waterproofed, and maybe it contributed to the building collapse. And of course, we don't know. It's all speculation. A lot of speculation out there. We're going to have a nice talk about that topic today. We're also going to bring in the whole idea of any of my community association managers that listen to the podcast, any regular people that might be on a condo board or a homeowners association board. We're going to talk about reserves and saving the money to do repairs. And I'll bring in a little bit about my background from just non-life-threatening things that you don't save for And then these big things happen and you got to save for it, and you got to start saving for it ahead of time. So Betsy will be able to speak a lot about that. She has a lot of experience there. So let's do a little go round robin here and introduce ourselves on the round table. So I'm going to start with Betsy.
I'm Betsy Barbieux. I own Florida CAM Schools. And you'll see Holly, my manager, wandering around behind me because she's actually working today. But we are in Leesburg, Central Florida. We offer pre-licensing classes to prepare for the state exam for those who want to be managers. And by the way, there is a shortage of managers, so there are jobs for those who want to work. And we also offer the continuing ed classes. We have the board certification classes, and we also have a round of classes for business partners, vendors who would like to work with communities. We're a little bit difficult to work with. And so once you kind of understand how we're set up, it makes it easier to deal with us. So we do that. And we also do manage some very small special communities. And
How
so
many years of experience do you have in community management now, Betsy?
Well, the management, I actually only have about 6 years, but I've been training and working with managers for 22 years.
There you go. Yes.
Yeah, I've been in the industry a long time, and I finally gave in to one person saying, please help us. Can you manage us? And I said, no. They said, please. I said, no. Said, please. I said, oh, okay. Now, then once you get one, and I don't advertise, but it's kind of like build it and they come.
But you understand all the rules that the state has and all that good stuff when it comes to community management and all the laws. And that's why you're here. Yeah. I'm going to go down to Mark Kramer. Tell us a little bit about you.
Oh, perfectly happy to do so. Yes, my name is Mark Kramer. My company is Vigilant Services. I'm the president and owner. And Vigilant Services is basically, in an elevator speech type capacity, a womb to tomb construction consulting service. I'm an engineer and project manager, 20 years in the business, spanning 2 continents. And I have chosen in the later part of my practice to focus nearly exclusively on condominium associations in Florida, though I do consult across the United States. And Vigilant Services facilitates structural inspections. We do statement of work authoring, RFP authoring, and we also turn into the owner's representative for the associations once a construction project reaches the hammer sitting nails phase. So I am very, very honored to have been selected to be here, and I'm excited to see the conversation unfold.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here, Mark. All right.
Yeah, so my name is Vito Mariano. I own a company that manufactures waterproofing by the name of Basecrete Technologies. In our pool division, we do well over 1,000 pools a month worldwide. And these days, it's been pretty crazy. We get an awful lot of phone calls. Like I'm on a job site right now because I had a panic phone call from a customer on a $35 million home, and it's leaking inside their home. All my reps are somewhere else in the world of the country, so I thought I'd do my favor. So I'm here right now trying to figure out what their issue is. I got into this business and started manufacturing in '88. By '93, I had 6 patents, all related to cement products. Basecrete waterproofing material has been around from about 1994, 95. And it's really taken off. It's a cementitious material that really works. And here we are today. I'm a firm believer that every vessel, anything that contains water should be waterproof for a few reasons, primarily to protect the steel that's inside the concrete. The second would be just as equal, the environmental issues with hard water that's inside these vessels with all the chemicals escaping into the environment.
Thank you so much. I value your experience coming into this podcast episode, and all of you have a different piece to add to the conversation. And that's why I invited the 3 of you to this podcast episode. I think it'll be a nice conversation. So I want to bring in, we all know what happened, the horrible, horrible tragedy that happened in Surfside condo down in Miami. And I know that they're still in, going through the rubble. It's going to be a long time before we ever really know, if we ever know, what caused the collapse. But I know we've seen a lot of different videos and different things online from different news media and that kind of thing. So I'm going to bring in Vito first. And I know there's been a lot of talk about the pool because it's a suspended pool over the parking garage there.
Yeah. So I've had quite a few phone calls. I have been asked to go down and inspect it. I didn't make it because like we talked about last week, I get a little bit emotional looking at sites like that, and a little bit of a disaster. I have my theory on what happened. I won't share it because it's still theory. But this kind of disaster is going to be looming for all the job sites in that whole region, where they're built on pylons, and it's a sad thing. There's not enough money that's going to be allocated for these projects to get completed. So we're going to be sitting on a lot of inspections, a lot of legal matters, a lot of engineers. I'm getting them now, quite a bit of them. I'm having a lot of engineering firms call me to come out with solutions, which we already have in place. The only problem is having to get these buildings assessed is the affordability. That's going to be the biggest issue with what we're dealing with.
Part.
Yeah, that's the hard part. You're looking at minimum the low end. For the typical job sites that we look at is $100,000 per unit, plus. And I did deal with a building that was in Sarasota. That was a very well-known building. They had issues with the pylons. This building split in half and had a 4-inch crevice in the middle of the floor. Of course, it was an expansion joint, right up from the ground up. It was 4 inches wide. Everybody was forced to evacuate the building. It was 253 units. Most of the owners.
I know where that was.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we got through it at the expense of the owners. The engineers ended up picking up most of the condos at $15,000 to $25,000 a piece, which are actually, they're all occupied and for sale and have been going for sale for the last year and a half, up to $700,000 per unit.
So when it comes to the suspended pools, I know you were on the PHTA board recently for the PHTA 10/ICC standard, Vito.
Yes.
And I did read through the standard. So tell us a little bit, did you guys start reviewing that standard prior to the Surfside collapse?
Yes, we started in January, actually putting some of the best in the industry together to work on the new specifications for all suspended pools. Mm-hmm. This just happened to happen towards the end of our completion of what the new bylaws specifications are going to be for the suspended pool industry.
I read through the new standard and it's very detailed, and it's going to be there for states like Florida, who I believe don't have specifications in the Florida building code for elevated or suspended pools right now, and with waterproofing. Mm. So that could be something that they can adopt, correct, Vito?
That is correct, yes.
They could adopt this as their section of the Florida building code. They could cite the PHTA/ICC-10 standard for elevated pools, spas, and other aquatic venues. I did get a copy from the Pool and Hot Tub Alliance. They do a lot of good work on that. And thank you for your time on that council, reviewing that, Vito, because I really do believe this is the next big thing for the industry to look at. It's just now been elevated in status, and how quickly they're going to move it along because of what happened down in Miami. Since it could be a possibility, not saying it was the pool, but it had an elevated pool, correct, Vito?
It had an elevated pool, yeah.
It was above a parking garage, correct?
Yeah, and the reason why is because these building lots of oceanfront, specifically the oceanfront lots, are very expensive. So
they don't have enough room. They build up.
They don't have enough room, or they don't want to allocate 100 by 50 where they can build a condo on and have a pool sitting there by itself. So they include it in the envelope of whatever they're building, and there's a lot of more money to be made and saving the room. That's why most of them are suspended.
Yeah, it's the developer wants to build units to sell. He doesn't want to build a pool that he can't sell.
Exactly.
So they build up.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So Mark, I'm going to bring you in now. So when it comes to the building like Surfside with a suspended pool, what are things that you guys are looking for, or what should a condo association or homeowners association that has a suspended pool like that over a structure be looking for? And Vito, if you have anything to add, certainly add in as well, because you have experience with that as well. What should conditions they're looking for to be corrected? Sure. What should they be looking for?
Well, the first and foremost thing. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead, Mark, please. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to kind of give you a bump set spike by saying the first thing that these condo association boards should be looking for is the correct professional entity to partner with them. And I say this a lot, not as a cross-sales medium. It's more or less to say that I have such a lot of respect, and I know Betsy Barbieux does as well, for the men and women who come forward and volunteer to be on this multi-million-dollar corporation absent any pay and make decisions that affect hundreds and hundreds of people. This is a daunting task. Forget the pay aside. So what I like to see happen when you get this 3, 4, or 5 member board together is for them to really put a strategy Rolodex together of trusted professionals that will help them stay afloat. But aside from that answer, and back to the mechanics of the building envelope, I'm very much a fan of preventative maintenance. And when you can start at time zero, and if I'm speaking on this podcast to anyone who's occupying a building that was built in the last 3 years or so, that's a beautiful, beautiful thing. It's unfortunate that we have Southside as kind of the impetus for better decisions. But when you recognize, like you do with the new car, that, boy, if I do periodic checks on my fluids and I check my brakes and I keep a log and maybe I'll photo document things over time, the chances of you getting to 300,000 miles without any headaches is really high. It's only when, like the analogy of working out, that we go from our 20s in our best shape ever and we get into our 40s and 50s after a couple boxes of donuts and say, you know what, I need to start taking care of my health. Well, the amount of inertia you have to overcome to get things back to when you were in your 20s is enormous. And I always look at this as I'm very big on these analogies because the building envelope is no different. The age of the building, it will always show you where it is sick. Nearly always. Pools is kind of an X factor. I, as an engineer, am actually a bigger fan of an elevated pool system than I am of an in-ground pool system, because I can see more readily where the sins of construction or the lack of preventative maintenance lie.
You can see the bottom.
I answer this very simply, and I'll get off the stage with this simple statement. We as boards need to do a walk with a great frequency. We're talking maybe once every 3 months, once every 6 months. We need to do a photo document walk so that we can compare over time where we have water seepage, staining, and other things, because I respect that most people on a board aren't construction veterans, aren't engineering veterans, maybe not a pool waterproofing veteran. You've got to make sure that you know the data is your friend. And gathering data, which is usually very low cost, a lot of times level of effort, maintenance teams can do this photo documentation as long as they have a boilerplate format off of which to work. That data is of great consequence to someone like me, possibly someone like Vito, to diagnosing how much effort is required to bring it back to time zero and extend the effective useful life.
Totally agree. So it's making sure they're picking qualified, good licensed contractors that are going to do the repairs too. Correct, Mark and Betsy?
Yeah.
And correct.
I'm kind of a community association snob, and that I really don't like dealing with professionals that aren't involved in our local chapters and groups, like our CAI chapters and attend our meetings and provide classes and hang out with us. I'm kind of a snob about that, and I want the attorneys to hang out with us. I want the CPAs, contractors, pool people, paving, roofers. I go to them first because I'm a snob about that.
And it's always, if the board members know how to even check to make sure a contractor's licensed and that it's current, not void, if they didn't renew it on time or anything like that. But it also comes down into the properties saving the money for any repairs. If the pool, like the one in Surfside or any of the other buildings that are older, of course, probably aren't waterproof to today's standards. So you said do that walkthrough. They find that there's issues. Issues are going to come up no matter what, right, Mark?
Issues will come up no matter what, just like they would plague our health. Absolutely.
Well, yeah, and Mark is always great at using analogies, and that kind of, he's an engineer, so he needs to kind of dumb it down for the rest of us. And I like his analogies, but it's just a building is no different than the human body. Mark, I'm going to steal your thunder here, but as it ages, it deteriorates, and it needs to be maintained more. It needs more care, and
correct.
You can do preventative maintenance, and I think that's Mark's point of view is do the preventative maintenance. And I love his idea of the data is your friend.
Yep.
And that if you will do the videographing of your buildings in different areas, you will see things over time on the videos that your naked eye won't pick up because you get used to seeing it.
Yep.
It deteriorates little by little, but when you look at your buildings and grounds in 6 month or 12-month snapshots, you'll see things.
So if you have a suspended pool, it's good to walk through where that pool is over the parking garage or wherever it's at, looking for the possible leaks. And Vito, you can probably add a little bit to this if you're with us. And any of those leaks you want to look for, go in the equipment room, because this equipment room, I believe, was down below in the parking garage. There were pictures of the pool equipment room that showed concrete damage, rebar that was, rusty colored. So obviously water damage. So that being down below in the parking garage, there obviously was water getting down into that concrete and damaging it. Correct, Mark?
There, off of the statement you made, there could have been, and maybe this is a good time in the pod to just interject a gentle caveat that with a pod that is centering on pools, with a panel that spans the industries that we span, I think it's important to mention that causality right now with Surfside is still very much up in the air. We talk about pools, but I think on this pod, we're not trying to say to our listening audience that there is a smoking gun to the pool or its waterproofing or lack thereof. But I would say that, the answer to your question is yes, as presented, but I, as an engineer personally, haven't been asked to go and investigate anything relative to either reports written for Surfside. You can kind of get what I'm doing. I'm doing this little legal disclaimer, but I think it's altogether important to say that, like a stack of Jenga blocks, it is not intuitive that the pool could be that block that tilts the cards. But in this case, and I will go on the record for saying this, I, as an engineer, would say for sure that it shouldn't be overlooked.
Correct. And that's the whole goal of this roundtable when we're talking about the pool, is to just have any suspended pool be alerted that that's something you should be looking at as well.
You should be checking it.
Yep.
Absolutely. And just quickly, I'll say to everyone's edification that the suspended pool is naked. The suspended pool is blessedly exposed on both underside and top for you to gather data. That's why I was making the point earlier about when you have a pool that's in ground, it's a lot harder forensically to really understand where all of the chinks in the armor are. But boy, they're pretty much naked, depending on the envelope architecture and other, to the lay observer, underscore the term lay observer, which arguably most board members are. And that's where consultancy and employing the right professionals is so critical to bring the ball over the goal line for those whose acumen from an engineering or structure standpoint doesn't hold it by itself.
Yeah, I couldn't agree. Everything you said, you nailed it, Mark. You're perfectly correct. I mean, there's not a building that I haven't looked at that's 10 years older or older that hasn't had some signs of a degradation. And I always look for one thing. It's the amount of steel that I can see that's exposed, the amount of cracking, any shifting, any moving. Like if anybody's ever stood in a 10-story building on a pool that's built on a deck, when a car drives in and around the parking area, you can actually feel the pool moving.
Feel it. You can feel it.
You can feel it.
Oh, boy,
It's moving. So in that process, there's always moving. And the more they move, the more deviation you're going to get. Eventually, they're all going to listen. We're busy out there every day, all day, every day, dealing with engineers, dealing with contractors, general contractors, and owners. I can almost say I can't even tell you the high percentage there is of buildings that need to be fixed. And I'm a firm believer. Concrete with steel has to be waterproofed at any level, just so it's protected. And that's primarily why I got in the industry. That's my whole background. Concrete, we need to have moisture, not go near the steel if we can prevent it somehow. And that's what I do all day, every day.
Vito, what specifically for a suspended pool that, at an older one, like some of these condos, now that we're having this conversation about suspended pools, what should condo owners that are going, the board members are going down and doing this, as Mark said, check the building, take pictures. What should be something that they're going to go, oh my gosh, I need to have this pool looked at, or whatever. What
that leg pipes, dripping water.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
What are some of those signs, Vito, that they should be looking for?
Well, other than the fact there's thermal and there's condensation and this and that, I just quickly assessed this $35 million home. As soon as I walked in, you can see they don't have a fan. So the difference in temperature outside, inside, it's leaking water. It's its own moisture. It's moisture. It's self-prevailing moisture that happens from the difference in temperature. But it's a leak. And I've seen gushers. I've seen leaks. I've seen major structural cracks. I have been to job sites with engineers and just looked at it and said the whole pool has to be demolished. That's the last thing they want to hear. And I shared this story with you the other day. I mean, we're looking at a very well-known building in off of Brickell in downtown Miami, where the whole renovation for this whole pool, including beautifying it, was $1.2 million, and they were complaining. And I'm looking at this condo unit, thinking, you know what? The least expensive car I seen coming in here was a Rolls Royce. and I tried to remember, it was fun. It was funny. I had to laugh on the inside, thinking, the starting units on the first floor were at that time 6.7 million, all the way to I think 28 or 29 million, and they were complaining about the assessment with 162 units. I remember 162 units. They were worried about the $1.2 million. I'm thinking, you know what? Sell one of the cars. Just so easy.
I think Betsy can relate to this quite a bit.
There you go, Betsy. Yeah.
I'm kind of blunt, sometimes accused of not being all that nice, but welcome to life in a community association. You've just entered into a contract. When you buy in, you've entered into a contract with however many, 162 or however many people that you don't know. And you have just agreed to sign a blank check that you will pay whatever your share is to keep up the building and for future improvements. And I don't know what else to say, but welcome to life in a community association. I don't mean to be mean, but you signed a contract with people you don't know, with a volunteer board of directors, and you need professional management that's good. And there is bad professional management. We're finding some around here, aren't we? Yeah.
The best part, Betsy, is when you're in on these conversations, you get pretty well schooled on how you want to approach the board members and the HOA members. I'm thinking, So let's not shock them on anything. Let's just glide our way comfortably, and then we can get to the nitty gritties. I said, no, I can't do that. So the last board meeting, I actually walked out because I couldn't handle the stress. After I was told how to handle,
Welcome to life in the camp. Wait till you see my next article in the
exactly.
journal.
Yeah, exactly.
And if I could go there too, and this might be a bit of a transition point, Lauren, but I agree with this, that we in this country specifically, I mean, I've worked in 2 countries mainly, but in this country, we are so litigious. We are so blame oriented. Even a board, when things start to go a little bit south, isn't as much inclined to say what's root cause and preventative action for the future, but who did what and why, and can we get our lawyers to get some money? What we need to do is recognize that for as long as I can recount from a building and doing building structure standpoint, we talk about mathematics and engineering and the people that devise certain things, and we're talking like people that are, we've been quoting the same stuff for 500, 600 years. Archimedes, Newton, Pythagoras, Euler, Fermat, Descartes, all these people are still the same people that have the basis for engineering a building. And where I'm going with this is when you have that ancient art of engineering meeting what I would argue as a modern art of architecture, which is not engineering, it is a false assumption that I would put forward that all buildings are built well. And it's not a blame-oriented statement. It's that as architecture progresses and engineering quasi-progresses, there is a certain betterment that happens on process. A lot of process is what is at fault when buildings start to degrade, because we have more modern material science that contributes to better waterproofing. We have multi-stage, multi-layer coating systems. We're getting better and better. And where I'm going with this is, again, back to my statement that the board is this innocent, usually do-good-minded group that just is floating around in the wind, waiting for good advice. What we need to remember is that when we budget for our reserves, as a building starts to age, if you are straight line linear budgeting, you're doing the wrong thing. We have to have a curve. There has to be an assumption that at point in time, distant on the x-axis, we have to rebuild what was built, because it will no longer be relevant for our modern society to rectify. You can't keep improving upon the reel-to-reel or 8-track tape and hope that the sound quality is going to be like a CD or MP4. Eventually, you're just going to have to toss that thing in the trash. And that's why people shear off their balconies and redo them. And I'll say another thing is, like, concrete is such a complex but utterly simple thing. And someone said to me recently, is like, why do we have all these modern concrete problems? The friggin' Parthenon's still standing. I said, but the Parthenon doesn't have a rebar. We have to remember that it's just sand, aggregate, and metal. And if we're not coating, with frequency,
it rusts. Rusts.
And pozzolanic material. Wow, that's very well said, Mark. By the way,
yeah,
I really like what you said.
That was
good.
Right.
Didn't have any steel. It just had pozzolans, and there's still some of the main carriers in Italy for the viaducts for carrying water. Still in existence.
Yeah, the ones in Israel still exist. They don't have any steel in them.
Thank you for bringing
exactly. And the intention of post-tension concrete systems is very good. The intention is good, but it has a much shorter life than if we do Parthenon type architecture, I guess I'll call it. But altogether to say that, and I would be very curious at Betsy's opinion on this, the guidance necessary for budgeting to prevent and budgeting to maintain cannot be straight line guidance. It is complex, and there should be curves involved, and the CAM education is integral to developing that type of budgeting philosophy, in my opinion.
Me too. I think so too.
I was, in making reference what you just said, right now, all the ambulance cases are coming out on this misfortune of what happened in Miami. I'm getting the calls. Everybody's trying to put their P's and Q's together. The lawsuits are all gathering, coming together. But, and I deal in many different countries at the same time. Let's think about Canada for a second. I do an awful lot of work with some very large developers in Canada. Their process is quite different. Everything they do is a lot more scrutinized than the way they do it here. Their standards are different. I would definitely think that some of them are higher. The last time I was there was last October. I was surprised how much structural non-steel they're building, and they're replacing the steel with fiber, Teflon rebar. And I asked one of them, at the price. One of the major developers was Tridel, and they own hundreds and hundreds of large high-rise condominiums in the city of Toronto. To have to spend that kind of money, I'm looking at, I kind of analyzed what they were saying, but we're going to be owning this business, and our kids are going to own this business 20, 30 years from now. What we can save today, we'll save a lot more later. What we have to spend today, we can spend a lot more later. I'm looking at all this rebar, and it's never going to get corroded. So they found an engineering way in order to pick up the difference in the load by adding more steel, thicker, whatever. But that's the route they're going. And I've yet to see that kind of construction here because of the difference in cost, which is really not that much.
Yeah, agreed.
Thank you.
Agreed.
Hello, sorry for the short intermission, but I wanted to say thank you to my other awesome podcast sponsor, which is Joe Trusty and Marianne Trusty with poolmarketing.com. So please listen into their short little ad here and how they can help you in the pool industry. They do so many different things. They have an awesome new magazine that's online and now also in print that you can get great information from. They do websites, marketing, and they all specialize in the pool industry. So please just take a few minutes to listen in to what they have to offer. And they're wonderful, wonderful people. You can find them anywhere on social media as well. They're very involved. Thank you so much, poolmarketing.com, for continuing education through the Let's Talk About Pools podcast.
You may be wondering, why do my competitors always show up ahead of me on Google? You want to know how you can get your website to the top of the search engines fast? You've been racking your brain thinking of who can help you with your website's search rank. Well, wonder no more. Poolmarketing.com specializes in SEO for pool companies and can get you to the top of the search engines in no time.
So Betsy, I want to bring you in on the reserve side and what happens really quick, what happens in general with a lot of these associations and what it causes problems, like possibly contributes to issues with buildings deteriorating, but also what should they be doing properly. And what do you see on the pike with the state after the tragedy that we just had, where we heard that they didn't really have any reserves?
Well, the statutes clearly say that you have to have reserves. And the statute lays out a very nice formula that a simple person with a spreadsheet can use. It's not a complicated formula, but you need professionals like Mark and Vito to give us some figures, like life expectancy, how much life is left on the pool or the roof or the concrete, and then begin to project what the cost to replace would be. Now, we're having to project out on some of these things that are 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years out. We're having to project out. So we do need professionals, construction cost percentages increases, things like that, that we will modify that reserve schedule. So they're required to reserve, but the state has an exception to the requirement, and they allow owners to waive, like make zero the reserve amount or reduce it. And this is likely then what happened in South Florida. And I do hear of it often in South Florida that a lot of the owners will say, well, let's don't do reserves. If you need money, just let me know and I'll write you a check. But the rest of the state can't sell a car and write a check. So they're supposed to reserve. And I tell you, the comment is, I'm not going to live here in 30 years. I don't care about the roof. I don't care about it. But
I don't care about the pool. I don't care about the balcony. I don't care.
Concrete. but you need to pay for using it now. You need to pay for using it now. And we now have a very real horrible example of taking care of people in the future. And by reserving now, you're taking care of people in the future, and hopefully something like that won't happen. But reserves are required, but it's the owners who can dumb it down. And I don't think they have education. And all they're looking at is the bottom line, thinking, well, we'll just dumb it down. We'll just not reserve any, or we'll just reserve part. Or you have boards who are not using professionals like Mark and Vito to give us some actual real figures. Instead, they're using Scooter, who used to do roofs in Alabama, to give us a roof figure. And roofs in Alabama aren't like roofs here, and neither are roofs in New York like roofs here. And, and to both the gentlemen's point of view, they don't have a moisture problem and rebar problem in Arizona. They don't have a problem with moisture in other states. So you can't come from another state and say, well, we don't do that there, because we do have a moisture problem in Florida. Yeah. We have water all around us, in us. I mean, but, you know, I remember talking to a forensic engineer who came from Arizona, and he had never seen mold before. He had never inspected a building with mold because they did not have it there. But we have it here. So it's entirely different. Here we have to deal with the moisture, and moisture rusts metal.
So I'm hearing local contractor to Florida that knows our stuff.
Contractor from Arizona. Yeah. We need somebody from Florida who understands moisture intrusion. And the same is true with paint. Paint is a barrier to the moisture intrusion. And boards will look at that building and go, oh, it doesn't need to be painted. It looks pretty good. Well, you need to have a professional Florida expert. I actually have a little tool that you can measure the depth of paint, the thickness of paint.
That's cool.
It's a cool thing.
No, it's absolutely true. Can I borrow from what you were saying to launch into probably my last topic before my heart starts? Because I saw Scooter yesterday, and I was talking to Scooter. He's getting a little older, but he's a great metaphor because, and this is not to denigrate Florida, but it's a very important thing to be a historian when you're talking about building science. Florida, from a building envelope standpoint, is a relatively baby state in the space of building science in the United States. Yeah. Architecture and building was booming in the new world far earlier than it was in Florida. And if you look at the life cycle of what was required by the building departments in Florida in the early 1900s, mid 1900s, you're going to find a stark contrast between the scrutiny levels of New York and Florida. I'm not casting blame, and I'm not going back and saying that we did things wrong. It's just a matter of fact. It's a matter of historical fact. So where I'm going with that is a board, if the board doesn't employ a consultant, I'm very big on diagnosing issues and understanding the future off of the specs. If you as a board have the ability to get a hold of your prints, to get a hold of your original documents, a lot of times,
blueprints.
The whole professional process that either Vito does or I do is made a heck of a whole lot easier because, again, back to my old statement, I don't presume a building was built perfectly well for its architecture. I go back to the spec and I see that parking lot and I see the pool on the parking lot and I see how they cantilever the weight. And I say, you know, that's problem one. Do they have efficient vibrational dampeners between the pool solid structure that does not give and the rest of the parking structure that will give as cars drive over it over time? All of this to say that once you have that foundational understanding, then you could platform a project or plan toward goodness. Whereas if we're constantly throwing money at an otherwise poor design, no matter how much money and how great the architect or the contractor that comes in to fix it is, you're still trying to make the Pisa straight. Pisa's going to lean. It's just how well can you keep it up leaning? You don't want to make it straight. Sometimes you have to look at the specs. So that's all I'm going to say. I appreciate this time, Lauren. I hate to end this so abruptly, but to my esteemed panel and my host, Lauren, thank you very much for inviting me on today.
It was great to have you,
It was
Mark.
great having you too, Mark. I just have a couple last things for Betsy really quick. So do you see any changes in the reserves with the state?
No.
No, they're still going to have it where they could waive the owners could waive it, and they're not going to make any requirements that they have reserves.
Yes. Yeah, that would be my guess. I think what we're going to see is more changes in insurance.
Insurance. Gotcha.
Yeah, we're already having disastrous kinds of changes in insurance just from the storms in Texas.
Yeah.
And some like AMCAP going bankrupt and some other insurance carriers going bankrupt. We're having a hard time with property insurance. And I think
so the insurance may steer that whole thing, and it may steer them to property owners to saving reserves. And I'll tell you really quick, just from my experience, I can tell on the reserves part how these associations don't save, because these are little things that would turn into a battle with me. And these were properties on the beach in the county I worked in. I worked for my background with the local health department. And these are multi-million-dollar properties, condos. And it would be, they decided to put up whatever pool rule sign they wanted to put up that looked really nice. But they're missing like 2 of our state required rules. So now I'm putting a violation. They got to replace the sign. They're fighting over the cost of the sign. We just had this sign made.
Yeah.
And we're talking, when we're talking about waterproofing of pools, Vito could attest to this, how expensive that is. So we're talking pool rule sign they're battling over. And then we talk about resurfacing of a pool, and they'll battle over that. And that $10,000 to $20,000 to resurface the pool is a lot less than what we were talking about with waterproofing a pool. I'm not sure if Vito's still hanging with us here, but he would.
I'm still here.
The cost is vastly different between the things I'm talking about versus waterproofing a pool, or if they have damage to a suspended pool, correct?
Waterproofing is one of the least expensive things that you could do to anything that has anything to do with concrete, especially the swimming pools where it has to contain thousands of gallons of water.
I'm talking about existing pools that have damage that aren't waterproof properly. That's costly compared to like resurfacing or pool rule sign.
Yeah. And a lot of these pools have to be rejuvenated after so many 5 to 10 years anyways. At that point, it's one of the reasons why we're really busy. At that point, a lot of them are getting waterproofed and done properly. There's still thousands of buildings that are not.
When we talk about waterproofing of pools, as we're putting new pools in the ground, and say there is a shift in requirements for at least the public pool sector to be properly waterproofed as if it's a suspended pool, what is involved with that in the general sense for the listeners?
To just bring it down to the concrete, and some of them don't. If the plaster is intact, you can waterproof the plaster, set your tiles, and refinish it, whether it's tile, stone, or plaster. It's very quick, and it's really not that expensive.
It's like the Surfside pool being over a parking garage. Is it have like an extra envelope? Is kind of what I'm thinking. It's an extra thing it's in. If the water leaks out of it, it goes into this other vessel around it.
Yeah, so that's a very good point. So from now on, they have to have a second containment, which is the primary is the pool. Secondary is any leaks, any cracks, any spillover. The water's contained into a sloping area that is a pod. It's a pool within pool, basically, where the water's drained outside of the building. And not all of them were built that way. A lot of them were not. But over the last so many years, a lot of them have a second containment. In the PHTA, that is the specifications that we did put together. Going into law, that has to have a second containment.
That's what I was reading. So I just wanted the listeners to understand like what they're going to start seeing on new suspended pools with new condo buildings being built, since our housing market is so busy. That's something that we're probably going to be seeing. So the walk away here is look at your buildings, do pictures, look at everything, right? Pay attention, get things repaired.
Save that money.
Save money.
Well, just to add to what Betsy and Mark were saying a little bit earlier, I was at a very beautiful condo that had suffered a structural crack in the middle of the pool. And I looked underneath it, and I was with the engineers and the general contractor and the owner. And I said, how come, this is a huge 18-foot span. Why didn't, I'm suggesting you have to bring the pool back in shape. You have to put the steel back in, mend it together, like a zipper or whatever, re-engineer it. You have to put 2 support columns. It was like, oh, no. We can't lose 2 parking spots. That's what the argument was. Choose parking spots.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
We need to start. We need to make. Yeah, we're got to make sure we don't cheap out on stuff because it could be people's lives involved down the road.
Well, and we've had a very bad object lesson on that.
Yeah, so I don't sit in the HOA because it's not good for my heart. So I prefer somebody else from my company goes and approaches it. And
so the takeaway: save your money, associations. If you're a community association manager, make sure they're saving their money.
You can either pay a little bit now or you can pay a lot later.
Right. And
a lot later in this case was lives.
And it's usually a lot later, correct?
Yes.
And sad.
You got to think about that depreciation. You got to protect the people there. You got to start. Human beings got to care about human beings, even if you're not going to be alive for it. That's the takeaway here that I want, is that we need to pay attention to things, save our money. It's a little bit at a time. It could be over 30 years, but then the money's there. I mean, it's always, if you talk to any accountant, they talk about depreciation. My husband happens to be an accountant, and he goes, technically, if a company has equipment, or he used a vehicle, if you have a vehicle you use, technically in the accounting world, they would tell you, if they're your accountant, that you should be saving for depreciation as you're using the vehicle every month, and put that away so that you don't have to take a loan out to buy that piece of equipment. Yes, you've got the money there based on today's prices. You do have to raise that depreciation up every year as well. You can't be saving based on what you were saving 20 years ago either. You got to move it up as you go. And that's my husband being the accountant here. I'm adding his little bit in.
A good thought. That's a very good, another analogy, but that's really good.
Everything depreciates. I mean, you always hear that when you buy a new car, as soon as you drive it off the lot, it's not even worth what it was when they sold it to you on the lot. Mm-hmm. It depreciates as soon as you drive it off. And I think that's
it's 28% to be exact, which is a lot.
Yeah. So you got to think that that's true probably of anything that we build or anything that we purchase. So if you're purchasing a condo, you've got to assume that you're going to have to up the game as that building is aging in order to put the repairs in. So
to use Mark's analogy, as our bodies get older, it costs more money at the doctor.
Yes, it does. Yes, it does.
Using his analogy of a building being like a body, the older it gets, the more money it's going to cost. And you have signed a blank check when you move into a community association saying, I will pay whatever it takes to get this old body going.
So if anybody is interested that's listening, more info on proper waterproofing of pools, Vito Mariano is definitely the guy to talk to that's been on this roundtable call. Can you give your contact info for anybody, like your email or anything like that, Vito?
Absolutely, yes. And thank you. My personal email is iknowcement with an IKOW cement@gmail.com. Everybody kind of laughs because it's funny. And the other one is the main source is info@basecreteusa.com. So iknowcement@gmail.com and info@basecreteusa.com.
And he knows his stuff. He's been interviewed. He builds, he's doing this waterproofing all over the world. And Betsy, how can they get a hold of you? I know Mark has left us at this point because they had a meeting, but you can go ahead and give his info too if you have it. So
you can email me, Betsy, Betsy, at FloridaCamSchools.com. Florida spelled out CAM, schools with an S.com.
Awesome.
Also, we have a website, FloridaCamSchools.com.
And if you want to learn more or understand more about how these associations work, she also has her own podcast called Cam Matters.
Mm-hmm. And we have a show every month. It's on YouTube. You can search Cam Matters, and you'll see a show once a month. And Mark has been a guest of mine, as well as Lauren. So you'll see some shows with them too, and some more information.
And it's been wonderful having all of you on here, including Mark. Tell him thank you for being on. I know he had to run for another appointment. Thank you, Vito, for being on this special roundtable podcast episode, and just talking in general because of what happened over here. What should we be looking at? That's what this whole thing was about. What should we be looking at when it comes to our suspended elevated pools moving forward, so that we can try to make sure what are we looking for on the existing ones that, of course, are not properly waterproofed, and what to do. And then what are we going to be seeing in the future with new buildings and new elevated pools going up? And that was the point of this whole roundtable episode, was to bring some of the and different ways that people need to think about it, not just the concrete, but understanding how associations work, how they save reserves to be able to bring people like Vito in to be able to pay for it. So it's a food chain here that's all people involved. I think you guys agree. So
okay. Thanks, Lauren.
No problem. You guys have a wonderful
nice
day.
To meet
Thank
you,
you
Vito.
so much.
Thanks for diving in today with the Let's Talk About Pools podcast. Be sure to follow us on our YouTube channel or our Facebook page. And feel free to rate, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you listen to your podcasts, so more aquatic professionals like you can learn about the show. We appreciate it, and we'll catch you in the next episode of the Let's Talk About Pools podcast.